So hi everybody, Deborah and Lolly again with a bunch of books to talk to you about. And of course, this week they're all information books. We've tried to choose kind of a range of books, some old, some new, some borrowed, but none blue. So yeah, I think we'll just go ahead with it. As always, you will have a handout like this that's a PDF. It will not have all of these things crossed out and notes on it. Um, and for those of you who can get to campus, there will be a book bin in the JCRL starting Tuesday morning. Thanks very much to Deborah, who will bring in all the books that the JCRL doesn't already own. So coming up first, this is an oldie but a goodie. And I mentioned it in the asynchronous video that Jean Fritz, a lot of times she is credited with beginning this idea of creating information books that are much more engaging than the books used to be. And this one is And Then What Happened, Paul Revere. Her books are, all of them begin with this sort of a question, which, you know, again, it's all these little things about it that helps draw kids in. And the amazing thing about this book is it's an oldie. You know, it's perfect example of old-timey color separations, and you know, there's more text than a lot of the books that we've looked at so far. It's not a picture book; it's an information book that is illustrated, in this case by the great Margot Tomes. And as I said too, he's got what she does is the only times there's something in quotes is if it's something that Paul Revere actually wrote, or so, you know, she's got quotes from his letters, and you know, there's a picture of him up in the front, and it's attributed. So there's a picture by Margaret Tomes, but it's based on a specific portrait that was done during his lifetime. So, you know, I would say take a look at this and see that not all old information books are boring. The next one I've got on order, it just hasn't come yet. So Deborah, bless her heart, found it at the library for me. This is actually a much more recent book by Carol Boston Weatherford. So a lot of you might know the story of Henry Box. He got his last name because you know, his name was Henry. He was an enslaved man who figured out that one way he could potentially escape to freedom was to mail himself in a big box. And he did that, and you know, lived to tell the story. It became kind of legendary. And there is at least one other really good picture book about this guy. But of course, Carol Boston Weatherford, her deal is that she's writing this in verse. And I think, Deborah, can you confirm that? Yeah, there we go. Now you can really see. So again, it really draws you in. And in her case, you know, sometimes people try to write in verse and they get bogged down, and just for the sake of a rhyme, they end up writing things that are really convoluted. Yeah, so you can see her. She just really plays around with format. I can't wait till this book arrives tomorrow and I can really dig into it. There you go. Yeah, there you go. So that is Box. And then next one I've got is called A Drop of Water. It's by Walter Wick, who is mostly known as a photographer, and specifically a science photographer. And he became fascinated by a man named Snowflake Bentley, who I think is sort of part of the curriculum in a lot of schools right now. And he was, as a boy, he had a microscope, and he tried to photograph things in the microscope. And he eventually became obsessed with trying to photograph snowflakes, because of course the problem is they melt if you bring them indoors. So A Drop of Water by Walter Wick, it does go into snowflakes. Here's the back. You can see there's a snowflake that he photographed. But it's all kinds of aspects of water. I'll just show you the back of it. You can see steam there. Everything in here is beautifully photographed. And the book also includes some pretty easy science experiments. And it's just the sort of book, it's so beautiful to look at, that what I found was, and you know, I first shared this with kids way before anyone had an iPhone with an easy camera. And you know, my niece, who really disliked reading and books, uh, she was kind of obsessed by this book, and she wanted to go out and like try these experiments and take pictures of them herself. So I would say this is definitely the sort of book that some kids are going to be really drawn to. Okay, next up is Deborah.
Yes, so this next book is called Emma's Poem. And this is a book about the poet Emma Lazarus, who wrote the well-known poem, The New Colossus, which is found now at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Lazarus was born into a wealthy Jewish family in New York, but she was always attuned to those who were less fortunate than she was. And when the Statue of Liberty was being built, there was a need to raise funds for it. And many famous writers of the time were writing things to help raise money. So Emma wrote this poem, The New Colossus. I'm sure you are familiar with some of the lines of it. It's not a long poem. I'll just share with you some of the last few lines. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And there's a picture of the Statue of Liberty. And this is just a really interesting story about her life, which unfortunately was much too short. She died in her late 30s, I believe.
Yeah.
That is Emma's poem.
Great. The next book here is First the Egg by Laura Vaccaro Seeger. And I mentioned her, I think during the first class, or maybe it's the second class, as someone who does terrific concept books. And First the Egg is a before and after book. And unfortunately, I don't know where my copy went, but there will be a copy in the box, and I'm going to drop in some images when I edit this. But basically, Laura Seeger does books with die cuts. That's right. We looked at her book Green on last week's video. And First the Egg has die cuts that actually show you. So first the, and there's a die cut showing an egg, and you turn the page, it says then the, and there's a chicken, and then the, you know, the die cut of the egg was actually showing part of the picture of the chicken. So incredibly clever. And it goes on like that, and definitely is one for you guys to take a look at. It's the kind of book that sometimes it's hard to find in libraries because the die cuts, they get worn out or ripped or something. But you'll notice if you get a chance to look at the physical book that it's also printed on heavier paper, which is, you know, a very important decision that was made for this book. Oh, next I have one of my favorite newer books, How to Be an Elephant. This is by Catherine Roy, and Catherine Roy is sort of a triple threat. She is a scientist, she's a writer, and she's a painter. And when she did this book, she actually was out in the field for months studying elephants, along with some scientists who, you know, do this all the time. And what she then was able to do is create a book, just sort of an amazing information book where there are some pictures like this where it's both an illustration of the elephant but also kind of a schematic. And this is talking about the elephant's olfactory sense and all the things that an elephant can sense just through smell. And then there are other images that just give you such a sense of, here's a wordless spread. And basically you learn, you kind of meet this group of elephants and you learn about them. And the reason it's called How to Be an Elephant is because it's focusing on this particular baby elephant and what its experience is within the herd. Deborah's turn again.
Okay, this is a new one that I just discovered called Jump at the Sun. This is the true life tale of unstoppable story catcher Zora Neale Hurston. And this is by Alicia Williams and illustrated by Jacqueline Alcantara. This is a really wonderful tale of the writer Zora Neale Hurston, who from her early days just loved hearing stories. There was around her in her youth in Florida just so many people who were telling these folk tales and what do you call them, the not troublemaker tales. You know what I'm talking about,
The
Wally.
Tricksters, yeah, we did a whole,
The trickster tales.
got a great book of Trickster
Tales.
tales. Sorry,
And she
yeah.
just found herself to be an extraordinary storyteller and realized she could really impact people through her tales. And this is just a story of her life, her desire for education, and to become a writer. And I really wanted to read it because her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, I think has one of the most beautiful and compelling opening lines in all of literature. And she's just such an extraordinary writer. This is a wonderful exploration of her life in a picture book.
Great. I can't wait to see that one myself. Oh yeah, so this is one that this is just, it gives you an idea of a different kind of information book. One reason I've got it here is because we were looking at feathers, and this would be a great book to have in the classroom at the same time that you have feathers. It's called Look Up. It's by Annette LeBlanc Kate, and she's an author illustrator. This is one of these books that's so full of information. It really does begin on the end papers, and the back end papers, you know, sorry, let me get to them. I have even more information. So it just goes, it's just so full of stuff. And basically the idea is she's chosen this subject. It's called Look Up Bird Watching in Your Own Backyard. Because birds are everywhere. They're urban, they're rural, they're in the suburbs. And there's a lot of great information about birds here. But there's also some really funny stuff where she's got the birds talking. So here's an example, of course, of, you know, Jean Fritz might not approve of this because we don't know what birds actually say. But I think will be pretty clear to most kids. And if it's not, as a teacher, you can reinforce that. But the kinds of things they're saying, of course, are, it both adds personality, but it also allows them to provide a lot of interesting facts in a way that that just makes them go down really easily. Oh, here's a great one. I love books about inventors, and I'm glad to say that I have a couple of them here. Marvelous Matty. This is by the great Emily Arnold McCullough, and this is a book about a girl who, as a young girl, she became an inventor. And not only did she invent the paper bags that still exist in grocery stores now, you know, in the old days, they used to say paper or plastic, and this is what you got with paper. Not only did she figure out this better way of making bags out of paper, but she also actually designed the machine that would fold them. And this was all before she was an adult. And so this book includes both illustrations by Emily Arnold McCullough, but also has, you know, actual patent drawings by Margaret Knight, who's Maddie. So good book. And, you know, one of the things you sort of look for in these picture book biographies is a way for children to kind of want to know about someone who they're really knowing about as an adult. So in this case, you know, she's such a great subject because, yes, as an adult, she was an inventor as well, but, you know, she actually started inventing as a child. And speaking of that, yeah, it's me next. Me, Jane, by Patrick McDonnell, whose style you might recognize. Oh, what is the cartoon? I'll look it up and I'll put it down in the text. But this is a picture book biography of Jane Goodall, the famous primatologist. And like Marvelous Matty, Me, Jane starts when Jane is a young child, because her fascination with nature, and especially primates, began when she was quite young. And in fact, her favorite toy was a stuffed chimpanzee toy. And at the very beginning of the book, we actually see a photograph of young Jane with that her toy, and then the whole book goes all the way through her childhood, and how she was, you know, she would fall asleep and dream of what she might do someday, to awake one day to her dream come true, to that famous photograph by Hugo van Laak. So Me, Jane, again, lots of fun, extremely well researched, and good picture book biography. Moonshot. Brian Floca recently has done a lot of these really large format information books. He did one on trains that got the Caldecott. This is his book about Apollo 11 and the first, walk on the moon. And he just, this is an example of a really large book that has a good reason to be a large book. It's not just large to attract attention and encourage sales, because he's talking about something which is huge. And you can see how he's, he varies his design. He writes and illustrates these books. So he's varying his design. We've got all these little panels that kind of build suspense and slow you down until you turn the page to lift off. So again, great book for young scientists. Let me see. Now and Ben is the next one we've got here. So everybody knows Benjamin Franklin was an inventor, but what Now and Ben does is it shows you some of it's the subtitle is The Modern Inventions of Benjamin Franklin. So on the left-hand page, we see the things that people use now, in this case, different kinds of glasses. And then on the right-hand page, you see the Benjamin Franklin's invention of bifocals. And so each spread has a different Now and Ben invention. Another book we mentioned last week, one of Molly Bang and Penny Chisholm's Sunlight series. This one is called Ocean Sunlight, happens to be the one that the JCRL owns. And I think we told you about these pretty well, I think, last week, but just sort of to give you the sense of it, all of the books in these series are actually narrated by the son. So what draws you into them is a little beginning. And, so the end papers are stars, which of course are all suns. And Ocean Sunlight, now we're kind of zeroing in toward the sun that we know in our solar system. And here we go. And again, introducing that we're looking at the ocean. And I am your sun, your golden star. And it goes on to show all the different ways that sunlight affects the ocean and ocean animals and currents and everything. So much more than you would have thought. And next is Deborah.
Okay, the next book is called Poet, and this is the remarkable story of George Moses Horton. This is by illustrated and written by Don Tate. This is the story of a young man who was born into slavery, who taught himself to read through happening upon this book, and just taught himself at night by the fire to read, and found that he had this great passion for and aptitude for poetry. Even before he could write, he was just crafting these poems and became well known for that. He was doing this before the Civil War, actually, and he was writing some poetry, and his first book was called The Hope of Liberty, which had some great acclaim, and there were a number of abolitionists who wanted to help him, along with the proceeds of this book, to buy his freedom. The person who owned him refused. You can see here an illustration by Tate that shows his dejection, and also some of the poetry he wrote around that. He did not actually gain his freedom until the end of the Civil War. He was in his, I think, mid-60s by the time he became free, but it is told in this tale that he found great freedom in the works that he did. He did learn to write, and then was, obviously was able to create these wonderful, wonderful books of poetry. I think crafted 3 of them in his lifetime. So this is just an excellent story about his life. There's Don Tate. I know we sometimes talk about authors. These books don't often have author photographs in them, but sometimes they do. So
Yeah.
excellent.
Don Tate is one of, I've never met him, but I understand from others that he's one of the nicest guys that they know. And he's someone he's been doing books for a while, but he's gaining more attention lately, which I think is a very good thing. And then we have Radiant Child by Jevaka Steptoe. This is the story of the painter Jean-Michel Basquiat, and who was sort of prominent in the 80s and 90s. And it's so, if you don't know, Basquiat worked a lot with, like, he would paint on things that he had found. Like, he would find a door or a window and he'd paint on that, or an old refrigerator. He did a famous painting that was on the door of the refrigerator in his apartment. And what Steptoe has done here is he went around the city finding all these old scraps of wood, which he then nailed together and painted on to make his illustrations for this book. So you can see that every one of these illustrations is done this way. Not so much in the style of Jean-Michel Basquiat, but in the Jevaka Steptoe way that captures the essence of Basquiat. And this book actually, it was one of my favorites of the year when it came out, and so I was thrilled when it won the Caldecott, and then even more thrilled when we asked Steptoe to do the Hornbook cover, which he did by nailing together lots of random pieces of wood and things, and which then was FedExed to me at home, and I got to figure out how to photograph it and scan it when it had, like a screw sticking out an inch from the surface and everything. But anyway, and just as a little side note, Jevaka Steptoe is the son of John Steptoe, who was also a picture book creator and a real trailblazer in the field too. His first book was written when he was 16, I believe, and published when he was 19. And that was one of those books that kind of broke what were previously rules that are no longer rules. Everybody now does what John Steptoe did, which in fact was to write a picture book text in the vernacular, in the way that people actually talk, rather than in the way that one is taught to write in schools in America. I kind of didn't realize how many books about inventors I had, but they're all a little different. This is Sequoyah. Sequoyah was actually a Cherokee man. And he invented a writing system, an alphabet and a writing system for the Cherokee language. And the reason he did this was because the white people were coming and wanting to make contracts and sign treaties. And the Cherokee people wanted to have a way to have their own versions of these and write them down. So not only is this the story of Sequoyah and how he went about inventing this alphabet, but it is also a story of perseverance, because he faced a lot of his fellow Cherokee people did not like the idea of his inventing an alphabet. And at a certain point, his entire workshop and all of his research was destroyed. However, what he realized when he came back to it was that he had kind of invented himself into a corner by inventing a letter, a different letter for every word. And so he realized that it was just going to get massive. So he switched to creating a different letter for each sound, which of course is similar to a lot of other languages we know. Deborah's next.
Yes, so the next book is called Some Writer, and this is the story of E.B. White, whose beloved book, Charlotte's Web, we're actually going to be reading for our last class. This is done by Melissa Sweet, who is known for her excellent work. And I remember when this was about to come out in 2016, Lolly, we were doing it. We were either in children's lit or adolescent lit, and we were awaiting this. There was a lot of buzz about
Yes.
the arrival of this book. Melissa Sweet is just known for her extraordinary collage work. She is an amazing illustrator, but she's also a person who lives up in Maine, quite close to where E.B. White lived, and she had access to a lot of his photographs, manuscripts, number of the writings, and she had she had a connection with his granddaughter, Martha White, who did the afterword in this book. And so that gave her great access, but I'll show you a few of the pages. Here you can see an early work that he did, some photography, a photograph, some of his handwritten notes. So those are some of the things she had access to and are included here, but then her own wonderful illustrations, which you can see. So this is, I think, the only fully illustrated biography of White, and it is extraordinary. Wouldn't you say, Lolly? I think this is
Absolutely.
an exceptional book. And for anyone who loves White's writing, not just Charlotte's Web, but the many wonderful books that he wrote for children and for adults, I think would really enjoy some writer.
It's such a labor of love because she did so much more with this book than she had to. I mean, you'll see that she's decorating the edges of every single page.
Yes.
She just fell in love with this whole project. And yeah,
Look at this. I know this is just one spread, and the work that went into it.
yeah, I mean,
Incredible.
I guess it's swanning.
Yeah.
And then the last book we're doing, as you may have noticed, what we're doing is we're doing these alphabetically by title, which is also how we're asking you to order your bibliographies. So the last one I'm sharing you is about an artist, Andy Warhol. One thing that's interesting about this is it is written by his nephew, James Warhol. And it's about when he and his family would go and visit their Uncle Andy. Andy and his mother shared an apartment. So they were also visiting, he was also visiting his grandmother, James was. So, and he's got this great way of, for example, here they are meeting Andy Warhol at his door, wearing one of his famous white wigs. And it's a very much a first-hand, he's got these great, this is like a cutaway of the building Warhol lived in. And, of course, Warhol is known, for many things, but this is very much a child's eye view of Andy Warhol. There are plenty of picture book biographies of Warhol, which do, go into some of the other aspects of his life, books for slightly older kids, with, I'm looking for a particular picture that I thought I had marked. Oh, no, crap. I really want to show you this one. There it is. Here is, so, here's a picture of Andy, and then there's James, who will of course grow up to be an artist himself. There's James's grandmother, Andy's mother. Anyway, just a really great way of having a picture book that is, really a primary source. Similarly, there's a picture book biography of Martin Luther King written by one of his sisters. So those sorts of books are out there, and it's just terrific when you're able to find them and bring them into a classroom. And, as we've said before, you're not necessarily going to be sharing these books with an entire class, but it's so great to have a variety of books on whatever topic you're looking at. So some fiction for those who like stories, some nonfiction, and some that sort of seem to fall somewhere in between in the narrative nonfiction world, which for certain kinds of learners just really helps to draw them into a subject. So that's all I have to say this week. How about you, Deborah?
I think that's it for me too.
All right, great. So we'll see you in class.
See you
Bye,
soon.
everybody.
Bye, friends.